Wally's almost ready.
I have not forgotten about
So
your
nice.
puppy.
Don't worry. I mean,
I actually
life
did.
is moving at such a fast speed right now.
I actually did a little bit of research for you, which is the most fun thing.
I should have brought a gavel.
Good for you.
I'm gonna. Mr. City Manager, we ready to roll?
Let's see if we get internet access in here.
City Clerk, would you call the roll?
Alderman Fisk.
Here.
Alderman John Batiste. Alderman Nguyen. Alderman Wilson. Alderman Holmes. Alderman Tindem. Alderman Grover. Alderman Rainey. Alderman Burris.
We have a quorum. City Manager, fiscal year 2009-2010 mid-year financial report.
Yes, Madam Mayor, members of the council, good evening. Thank you for coming out for this special meeting where we're going to talk about a couple of different things, and if you'll allow me just to take a couple minutes to review.
It's on. It doesn't make it any.
Okay, so we're not amplified in the room?
We're not amplified here.
Okay. Again, what I'd like to do first is to go through the agenda of the topics that we'll be covering this evening, and then Marty Lyons, our Assistant City Manager, will be making the presentations on behalf of staff. First, we'll give you an update as to where we are with the mid-year financial report, and included in that will be a discussion of the 2010-2011 budget and CIP update. We'll also do a separate discussion on the capital improvement program that would fall under the discussion regarding your goals on CIP budget planning. So we're kind of blending what are three items on your agenda this evening into two separate items. Before Mr. Lyons begins his presentation, I want to just talk a little bit about where we're at in the current year 2009-10, as well as where we're projecting to be in the coming fiscal year. You're going to hear from Mr. Lyons this evening that we're estimating at this point in the fiscal year, which ends on February 28th, that we have a $4 million deficit in our general fund. We are proposing, as you'll hear more this evening, to address this deficit in two different ways. One, to use $2 million of our reserves, as well as to a phrase I have coined, to manage through $2 million, and that is to look at spending across the board within the city and make adjustments accordingly, which we believe we can do in order to make up that second $2 million. At this point, I am not recommending any additional impacts as far as personnel is concerned. I'm not recommending any layoffs, any furloughs, any other impacts to our employees specifically. I think that in order to get through to February 28th and to continue to provide the residents of Evanston with high-quality service, I think we can balance the budget without having that impact on our employees. The second part of Mr. Lyons' presentation will be to talk about where we're at for fiscal year 2010-2011. At this early stage in our budget preparation, we believe we are looking at a deficit of $8 million. And we have already ideas on how to address that deficit. The City Council has directed us to conduct community budget planning meetings during the month of November. We hope that those workshops will also bear fruit as far as what we'll be proposing to you in January as the proposed budget for 2010-2011. These are difficult budget times. Certainly you look around the country at our neighbors, other communities in northern Illinois, I think everyone is dealing with difficult budgets. We can, as I've said, I think get through the current year responsibly as I've described. However, as we look at the next year, I think we are going to have to take some serious looks at how we provide services, how we fund services in order to come up with a balanced budget. So that's sort of an overview, big picture overview of those issues we're facing as far as our current year budget and what we're looking at next year. Mr. Lyons, again, has a presentation. I would be happy to answer any preliminary questions at this point. Otherwise, we'll let Mr. Lyons move forward with his presentation. At the conclusion of that, we have one additional presentation, and that will focus on our capital improvement program, and I have some preliminary comments before we get into that presentation.
Are there any questions? Seeing none, Mr. Lyons, go ahead.
Thank you, Mayor, members of council, Mr. City Manager, to all of the folks in the audience. We're going to go through months ago, we had the Federal Reserve come out and give a presentation. And with that, they had given us a variety of indicators, and we decided to go ahead. Sorry, is that any better?
It's not working.
What's not working?
Is that any
It is,
better?
yeah, it is working. It is
It's
working.
working in here. In looking at where we are economically, we looked at the Federal Reserve's most recent report, and that is for the 8th district, which is Chicago, that it's a mixed bag. Consumer spending is up for the second quarter, but business spending has declined. It's still declining, but at a lower rate. Manufacturing and constructions are showing signs of improvement, but unemployment is still increasing, but again, at a lower rate. It's still not a good thing. It's still increasing, and for those of you that have been watching, we're over 10% statewide. So credit conditions are improving, but if we looked at what we had going before, I don't know how they could have been any worse about 3 or 4 months ago, so they are improving. I think that what you'll see with those 5 bullet points is also carried right through in our report, that you'll see parts of those bullet points. So Evanston revenue reflective of the economy, we're running about 5% below budget. We could be a lot worse, but 5% overall is indicative of a loss in our economically based revenue sources. That's in our general fund. The other funds, capital, parking, and TIFs, are still fairly stable. The TIF funds are based on property taxes, and those are very stable. Parking has been, and still is, fairly stable. When we look at our monthly report, you see that parking has a large fund balance right now. However, we're about to make a $12 million bond payment in December, so that will take more than half of the fund balance out of parking when you look at our monthly report. Water and sewer funds have stabilized, partially due to grants that we've been receiving as a part of the stimulus funding and due to deferred projects. Revenues are still below expectations and projections, and part of that is due to our decreased pumpage again due to a mild summer where we did not have a lot of water usage, therefore lower pumpage, lower water, lower sewer revenues. Further grants have been received to support capital, and this is whether it's our Sheridan Road project or other projects. We also have received funding for parks as well. These have been very well received and needed as we look towards capital later on tonight. So, general fund. Again, we're looking at 5% under budget. That's $4.3 million. It's a big number, and it comes from a variety of sources, and it also doesn't just come from an economic downturn. There's a variety of issues that we face with the revenues dropping. General fund expenses, we're projecting to hold them 3% below budget. And that's with current staffing, using vacancies, holding the line on expenses, which would bring it down approximately $2.7 million under budget. Our reserve balance at the beginning of the year was $14.3 million. At the first quarter report, we showed this at $14.6 million, and that was an unaudited number. This number is based on the comprehensive annual financial report, the audit. So that's completed at this point. So if we go through with, as the manager outlined earlier, and we're successful in managing through the rest of the year, we would look at an ending fund balance of about $12.7 million or 14% of budget. And per budget policy, our fund balance minimum is 8.3% in the general fund. Our goal again is to keep service reductions to a minimum through the remainder of 2009-10. So what happened with our revenues? Well, first we have a bit of a different news, if you will. Because of the way that we do our property taxes, we receive our property taxes in the year immediately following the levy, even though we budget them to come in yet a year later. So this last year, in the budget, we showed a decrease of approximately $1.4 million, yet we will receive the 08 levy as it was levied, which will give us on a cash basis that additional push. For the 2010-11 year, we would then have a decrease per what was in discussion first meeting in November, so I want to come back to that later. So as far as revenues that are decreasing, at the beginning of, or at the end of the first quarter, real estate transfer taxes were projected to be $1.8 million below budget. So they've actually rebounded. We're projecting to come in just at about 50%. Income taxes are one of the items that we rely on the Illinois Municipal League, and they missed their target a lot since October, well, since about December through the present. The per capita amount, we started the year getting more than $90 per capita, and they're projecting to go down to $77 per capita on income tax. So that's a very large drop. We went from 7 million to under 6 million for this revenue source, and that was not projected by the IML when we were doing our budget earlier this year. The building permits are projected to be $550,000 below budget. That's on $3.8 million. So that's not too bad, or coming in about $3,250,000. The biggest surprise that we've seen, and you have seen an example of it, was utility taxes. We're looking to buy natural gas at an all-time low, or at least an all-time low for quite a while. Our therms are, the therm price is down below $6. So we're looking to buy at that low price, but this also means that a large portion of our natural gas utility tax, which is based on a dollar amount and not on the number of therms used, took a huge hit. We lost dollars there, and telecommunication taxes are below based on the lower economy. Basically, businesses aren't using quite as much of those services, so our telecommunications are down as well. Investment income is projected to be $400,000 below budget, and that, when you end up with interest rates between 0 and 0.5%, we're heading up towards 1% now, but it's difficult to make your numbers when rates are that low. We did lower the budget for next year to reflect that. All other remaining revenues we're showing to be about $900,000 under budget. One bright spot, we did have the switch of the when we sold Caravelli, that replaced the Anley sale that didn't go through, so that was a nice, we lost $50,000 on that, but it was still very well received as far as stabilizing general fund balances. So this, I won't go through this table, but you can see as we walk through each of them where the negatives are, and I went through the highlights there. Nothing really to go through that one again. Happy to answer any questions regarding that. Alderman Rainey?
Well, I believe one of the reasons, this really doesn't, one of the reasons that, granted the economy is bad. We knew that when we were working on our budget last year. And one of the arguments I made to you at City Hall was when you estimated the real estate transfer tax. I argued with you that there was absolutely no way we could meet that number. And you said to me, I will never forget this, you said to me, we'll fix it later. And I said, we can't be budgeting in that manner. And I believe that the building permit projection and the real estate transfer tax projection are both were very unrealistic, so that we could balance a budget without raising taxes at that moment in time. And I felt then it was irresponsible, and I want to go on record that I will fight to the end any over-projection of revenue this year. In the past, I do not ever remember the city of Evanston under or over-projecting building permits and real estate transfer tax. We've always been very conservative on that, and in fact, in several occasions, I fought low estimates on that, and was right that it always came in over. But this year, I knew, and I'm, only half as smart as the finance director and others, but I knew that we were not going to make those figures. And I knew that we were only doing it to balance the budget. I do not think a balanced budget by manipulating revenues is a good thing to do. I think it's as irresponsible as overspending, as underestimating your spending. So I would really caution us on that. Secondly, I want to ask you, in the water fund, revenues are tracking below budget at 35%. I want to know, can you take out of that 35% what revenues for Evanston usage is versus what the Water Commission use is? Those numbers are all mixed in there, right?
No, actually, we have them separate.
They're separate. All right, then I have this question. If our water revenues are separate, and I didn't know if they were or not, and they're tracking at 35%, if we did the calculations right, how can the sewer revenue be tracking on target at 50%? Because one is hooked to the other. I mean, we know that, right? We know that if our water bill is this much, then our sewer bill is going to be this much.
That is correct.
How does that work?
And assuming that both of the budgets were identically priced correctly, or estimated correctly, you're right, they should be much closer.
They should be the same. I mean, really, they should be the same. So I just,
Now, that is correct, though.
could you look at that and find out what happened there? Because that, I mean, we argue a lot with our constituents and with water users, you know, that the sewer is this and the water's that. And so when we come up with something like this, there's no way I could explain that.
We will have a follow-up explanation for council.
Okay, thank you.
Moving on, general fund expenditures. This is a similar slide. What we've shown, though, is that while many of the departments are showing the same level of expenses as in the first quarter, police and fire have had some turnover, and that has caused some payouts. We do have payouts according to union contract. We also have payouts when we have retirement, and those have pushed both police and fire above budget. We do have items in a different budget, a funding in a different budget, and we will move the funds to the right place, which will bring police and fire back to closer, we'll be right on top of 50% each. Police department is currently staffed at 100%, and fire department currently has one vacancy, so it's not surprising that they're running right at budget.
Well, are you saying that our police department is fully staffed?
That's correct. Well,
I find that
sworn.
hard to believe.
So we
That's-
do
that's
have
what I'm
vacancies
talking
on
about.
Civilian, but sworn we have 100% staffing right now.
What I would like to see is I would like to see the report that we got every single month for the last 20 years, a monthly report of police department assignments, for example, who's on the first, second, and third shift, who are the supervising officers, what officer, you know, the different departments. I mean, that is so helpful. And then on the cover sheet, the accounting for the number of police officers, like you might say there's all the sworn officers, but a lot of times 10 of those are in the academy. And so they're really not on the street, which means then we're having overtime from sworn officers filling those 10 spots that aren't out on the street. So that's important for us to know how many people are being paid right now to be on the street that are in training. Then maybe there's 10 or 12 on disability. We don't know that. All of that information was in that report. And city manager, that is extremely helpful to the council to have.
Alderman Grover?
Mr. Lyons, would you clarify that the fact that police and fire are tracking right now slightly above budget is accounted for because of retirements and turnover among sworn officers, not among civilians?
one-time payout budget and a termination payout budget that is a total of $600,000, and that is in a different, we track it separately, and we'll move the funds over there to take them out of the police budget and put them in where we're trying to track and give the council a look at the actual payouts that we incurred. Yes, Alderman.
Have we always included payout money in the regular operating budget of the police and fire department?
No.
So that's different this year?
Actually, we're going to move it, so, into the business unit where we had the payouts. It has not been moved yet.
No, but you're saying the reason that the police and fire department are over budget is because of these payouts.
Right.
And I'm asking you I didn't realize that would really affect the operating budget of the police and fire. I thought it would,
Well,
is there
actually,
another fund?
Well, no, it's all in the general fund, and if the budget has been set up this way in the past. These payouts truly are police or fire
Yeah.
or public works, or whoever payouts. They belong in that department budget. We have wanted to track it in a separate business unit, depending on the desire of the city. We can go ahead and move those payouts into the operating budgets to say, these are the true costs for turnover, these are the accumulated lead banks in these departments. It reflects the true cost of operating in the budget. But to be fair, the department's just operating within the guidelines of the contract or our personnel rules, and we want to make sure we have those funds either moved out to where we budgeted them, or we move the budget over to the department so that they can come in at budget with these payouts, because they are part of the contract in most cases.
I have one more question. Where is the money coming from that was the incentive money in the early retirement program? Is that money coming out of the individual budgets from the departments from which those people retired?
Yes. And that's coming out, and we'll get to it, that's coming out in the form of an increase in the IMRF employer contribution rate, where we will make contributions over the next 10 years to pay off our liability. And when we do get to that, all we're seeing now is the increase. We're not seeing the previous, when we went down to 69 employees and only hired a portion of them back. That's already taken effect. So we don't see that part of it. Now we're going to see the rate increase as the other side of that one-time decrease from not one time. I misspoke. The decrease in full-time staffing when we did the early retirement initiative incentive. So again, it is a matter for staff, all staff, to work through the remainder of the budget, to come in under budget, and that will be starting immediately. And it already has started. We have, and we'll get to the vacancy list, but we have been keeping a lot of positions open in order to hit the target where we're at. And as you see right here, through that year to date, we're at $42.8 million on $44.8 million in budgeted expenses. And the goal is to continue on and stay under budget, to come in at that 2.69 million under budget. Just in summary, again, don't want to belabor this too much, but this is a larger print version without a lot of detail of what we're looking at. Revenues and expenses, budget compared to the actual, where we hope to come in at for the year, with the use of fund balance and with a fairly large decrease in expenses as well. So what are we specifically talking about for the remainder of the year? In the first quarter, we talked about issues that we would look at. Well, it is now time, so we will implement a hiring freeze effective immediately involving all positions. This will include limitations on hirebacks, special duty overtime, all aspects where if we have vacancies, we're going to reduce the amount of people called back to cover the vacancies. We truly have to garner all of the savings from those vacancies. We'll also be looking at seasonal and temporary staffing and reducing that wherever possible. We'll be looking at implementing reorganizations. We have come to the council with one on public works as far as refuse and recycling. We're looking at administrative reorganizations that will formalize some of the vacancies that are currently present. So those are going to proceed as quickly as possible. We'll also be looking at spending freeze of all non-essential. The goal here is that we certainly don't want to have a $50 million payroll out there without supplies to work with. So we're not going to do that. But to the extent that we can go without certain items, whether it be, as you see on the last bullet point, small items of capital or technology, where we don't have to do that replacement cycle this year, then that's what we're going to do. We're going to hold off on those types of expenditures. We're looking at expenditure controls. Right now, directors have the authority to spend in their own departments, and we're looking at approving expenses over $1,000. This will, our goal is not to slow down services, but we are going to be looking at all expenditures all the way down to this level. Training and travel, I don't need to go through that. I'm just looking at trying to reduce that as much as possible. No further tuition reimbursement expenses to the extent that we're not violating the contract for the remainder of the year, and to the extent that somebody hasn't already put in a request and is signed up for the class. And lastly, to suspend capital and technology expenses. These are in the general fund, so we're not saying to stop street reconstruction X. We're just looking at the remainder of the year for capital expenses that have not been made. So the vacancy summary. And this is just general fund. We do have a few in water as well, but these are, and this is an estimated annual salary. This is not necessarily the savings we're going to receive this year. That would be less because in some cases we have a temporary filling in, or it's only for a part of a year. So as you can see though, these are, again, we have $1.6 million in vacant positions at the present time on an annual basis. I think that I shouldn't do that.
Alderman Burris?
I don't think so. Does this, the annual salary, so that's just the salary, it doesn't include the benefits portion?
It does not.
And what is the percentage of benefit portion that you would add?
The load depends on the department, so police and fire is a little bit.
Okay, so in general, for non-police and fire, because there are different
Well, you
animals.
could use 25% as a
25
rule of thumb
for
to be
yours.
conservative.
Okay. All right,
Oh.
so basically we just need to add 25% to that bottom line number.
2
Okay,
million.
thank you.
And again, that's an annual amount, that's not our actual savings, depending on if the vacancy just happened or if we plan to fill it in the very near future.
Alderman Grover?
Mr. Lyons, I can make an educated guess about what accounts for some of these vacancies, but the library, I don't know who that would be. What positions are there? And
We actually have several positions. At one point, the library was down, was it 14, Mary? Yeah, we were down at one point 14 full and part-time, so there were a lot of part-time in there. And we brought back some of the critical positions that they needed to operate, but we still have that much in savings from the, I won't call them non-critical, that would not be appropriate, but the ones that we've been able to run without through this year.
a second question then is there a temporary employee counterweight to the savings on salaries and vacancies?
Actually, I'm just going to sneak over to the next slide and say, so there is where, so what would we be talking about? Well, personnel savings, that does include the benefits. That's what I think we'll actually be able to manage to get that much out. So in savings in the general fund from the previous, so it's about half. We don't want to overstate anything. We're just trying to look at what we think we can reasonably get to by holding open positions. And we could have further retirements. One of the things that I think everyone has come to realize is that retirements or voluntary separations don't normally result in a savings to the city in the first year because the payouts usually are more than the remaining salary that we have. And as we go through the budget process, we'll want to look at, the city has been prudent and established a compensated absences payable reserve, and we'll want to look at that for the settling of some of these payouts. And we are, on the front end, we're looking at all of our union contracts to continue to limit the total accrual, but that's a long-term process.
Alderman Burris?
Speaking of that, so for the union contracts, there's a limited accrual for, I guess, vacation and sick time. For non-union, is there a limit on accrual for vacation as well?
Yes.
Okay, and what is that?
Vacation is 2 years. So that means that the amount
can
that I
have-
can accrue in 2 years' time.
Okay.
So if you
Right.
earn 3 weeks a year, then the most you can have as an accrual is 6 weeks.
Okay, and I know this is a discussion for another time, but just to sort of put in the, I guess, the queue, has there been any talk about limiting that amount of accrual so you don't have that much time on the books, so there's not a huge payout in one lump sum? So some places you can only accrue, keep on the books 3 weeks or 4 weeks in order to keep your budgeting more consistent over time. Just a kernel to put, I know it's not a discussion
We've
tonight.
actually been coming down. You
Okay.
would look at our accrual banks and say, this is coming down, but we have. There has been, it's been a steady process over the last several years to first to develop caps and then to start looking at them and bring them down. So that's a definitely year-over-year process or contract-over-contract process. So, now the personnel savings, that's a very hard-earned savings, if you will. The next one's not quite so hard-earned, and that's the fleet savings. And that is, in order to, one of the ways in order to make this work is, if we do, for the remainder of the year, we've spent $540,000 approximately, and if we cap that with another $460,000 in total, that would be half of the vehicles that we originally budgeted. Then the general fund would have an approximate 3/4 of that savings. Saving $1 million saves the general fund 3/4 of that. And that would be transfers to the fleet fund that don't have it. And then finally, just going through specific line items, whether they be the tuition reimbursement, whether they be testing procedures that we might not do this year. We're looking at, we have approximately a non-personnel and capital, approximately $18 million, and so we're trying to budget, so we're trying to say that we will come in with $700,000 in savings on that budget. It's only about a 5% savings, a little bit more in the last, we'll have to save a little more in these last 4 months, but that's our target. And that gets us to, we see approximately $2.4 million of the $2.7 million that we talked about in the summary slide that showed 3%. So it is not all about general fund. It is our biggest issue right now. So just briefly on this, the first 6 months, water and sewer, we will get the question earlier regarding revenues and as a percent of budget. We have had lower pumpage, we know that. Insurance fund continues to operate with expenses above revenues for the year. Council's been involved in a lot of the settlement discussions. We've been working very hard to keep each of those low, but we've had a lot of them. So to that extent, we've reduced our total liability, number of claims outstanding, dollar volume of claims outstanding, but we drained down our cash reserves in the process. And we will talk about that in more detail when we do the 10-11 budget.
Alderman Rainey?
Marty, can I ask you why in the insurance fund, liability legal fees are zeroed out across? What was that for?
I'm sorry, we just take a quick look.
Page 10. Liability legal fees?
But that was just how we, yes, I will.
And Marty, could you just explain what you just said?
The question that was raised in previous years, we had both fees, expenses in the budget that showed expenses for actual settlements and also expenses for legal fees. And for this year's budget, this year's estimate, we're not showing any of the legal fees. So we'll come back and point out whether that was combined in all of the settlement costs and we just eliminated a line item. That was what the question was regarding to. Next, we have the parking fund. And again, this is the first year that we have consolidated all of the debts in there. And as noted earlier, parking fund revenues are doing at budget. And we will have an approximate $12 million debt service payment for all of the debt that the parking fund helps to support, which will reduce the parking fund reserves down to more historical levels. Fleet fund, as we noted before, on the revenue side or on the expenses side, fleet fund is an internal service fund, so it depends on our other funds to get its dollars. If we defer purchases and give up transfers, then it will help our general fund deficit projection. One of the things that is of concern, I see our fleet manager out there, one of the things that's of concern is what will happen to our maintenance costs.
Excuse me, Marty, Alderman Rainey has a question.
Well, that's something that you're going to have to figure out, analyze for us. What's the trade-off of reducing, the new purchases by $700,000? Because whenever they come to us, and Dolores Holmes is
Justification.
the expert on this, why maintain a car at a price that exceeds its value? That's a big issue for us. So we need to know what's that going to translate to maintenance fees. But a reduction in the fleet service would definitely be that reduction in the general fund.
Correct.
That's where the money comes from. But, anyway, just go on. I'll
Sure. Again, just the police and fire tax levy contributions, although not a part of the general fund, per the actuarial report, were an average of 9.7% increase from the 3108 report to the 3109 report. That was per the actuary that we just did. So other fund expenses, again, a lot of this is the reverse of the revenue side. Major debt service payments are scheduled for later in the year. They will happen each year, June 1st and December 1st. And quite often, we just have an interest payment on June 1st and an interest and principal payment on December 1st. So that our third quarter, all of our debt service funds, some of the TIF funds, will all incur higher expenses for that third quarter.
Alderman Rainey.
And remember that. The $12 million debt service for the parking fund, how much of that is TIF?
Mr. Grasner's here. Do you have it off the top of your head? Because I don't.
11.8 million.
And that was 11.8 million for you to walk in.
Sorry, that was- nearly all of our debt service will come from our TIF districts, and that is in the downtown
For parking.
for parking. Thank you. So, again, the fleet fund, that's just the expense side of it, what I just referenced. On the revenue side, again, as far as police and fire, we know that we are going to have a higher annual required contribution. What you see at the bullet point is the change in our unfunded liability, changing from 145 to 158 million, and that's what's creating that increase in the tax levy this past year. The insurance fund is again experiencing those higher claims, so we are looking for 10-11 an increase in our contributions from all of our other funds, and hopefully this year we're also going to embark on presently our insurance fund. The internal transfer comes straight from the finance department, and while I'm happy to keep it there, it also might be a good idea that this year's budget we put it out into the departments where we have the claims, so that again it is a part of looking at it as a part of the operating costs. This last year we were at a total of about 1.3 million in general fund contributions net of any transfers, and now we're going to go up to 2.3 million for next year. At least that's what we're projecting. So this is just a summary, and again, this is our fund balance halfway through the year. So often we project them, So this is kind of a cash flow statement. Where are we at right now? So we're just before we would start, normally where we would start getting property taxes in. They'll be a little late, but we still have 11.8 million in reserves in the general fund. Again, the insurance fund at the bottom, please note that that is our cash in the bank less the bills we know, the claims payable. So we do not, I shouldn't say that we know we owe, that are out there and could be settled against us. We've had instances just in the last year where claims were settled for much less. In one case, our reserve bounced up $1 million because we had a settlement for much less than what it was reserved for. So next steps for analyzing our budget for 10-11, we're about to move forward with public meetings beginning in October, and I have a calendar on the next slide. We'll begin talking with all of the directors and managers about staffing and spending freezes, as well as the reorganizations that we referenced earlier. So it's now action time for all of those changes to get us to come in at that 3% under budget in the general fund. So what are we hoping to do in the 10-11 budget process? Well, as you can definitely tell from our first few council meetings in the last month and a half regarding the subject when it's come up, transparency is a very large goal. We have, last year we had one meeting in October, one meeting in November, and then we went into the regular council meetings. This year we're going to have 5 meetings from November 7th to December 7th. So there's going to be a lot of involvement as far as discussing our budget issues. And we hope to gain a lot of insight from both residents, staff, and the council on the needs of the city during this process. What is the goal this year? To get back to policy. And this is for what Alderman Rainey said earlier, and that is operating revenues equal to operating expenses. When we talk about where we're at with our revenues, I hope that we'll be able to meet that goal of a more conservative, not overly conservative, but a more conservative approach to the revenues. We're going to look at all services, and then we're going to look at capital, because it's not all about the general fund, capital programs within our means. Because of the economy right now, the capital budget has a direct impact on the general fund budget. If we need bonds to do our capital fund, then that's going to raise our levy that may have to come out of the general fund. So it has a direct inverse relationship with the general fund. So what are we projecting right now for 10-11? Well, as you saw, revenues were down approximately 5% below our 9-10 budget. We're projecting they'll be down another percent beyond that. So we are not looking, you've heard a lot of discussions in the financial press that we're coming out of it. Well, for us, one of the biggest issues is unemployment and real estate. And we're not coming out of those really quick. That won't be on the front end. So that's going to be a concern. The unemployment drives our income tax. So we're very much being guarded regarding our revenues. One of the bright spots is that the downtown tip will close, and approximately $1.8 million can go to the tax levy with no increase to any City of Evanston property taxpayer. There will be a reallocation of the downtown tax increment, just as all of the schools will go ahead and raise their levy to take into account what was before the $9 million going into the downtown tip. That will all be split up to all of the taxing bodies, and we will get approximately 20% of that. But as a home rule community, we must levy for it. If we do not, then it just goes back. One of the other things that we have been discussing is whether or not pension levy will be one of the sources for an increase. Will we need to have any tax levy increase? If there is such a eventuality, then we'd be looking at it for just the pension levy. Economy-driven revenues. Our sales taxes, again, I sound like a broken record with this, but we're doing really fairly well. We were a community with 12 or 13 auto dealerships, probably not quite so good. So we're tracking at about 5% below budget, and we're going to keep that for the coming year. We are not projecting increases. Income taxes, real estate transfer taxes, and utility taxes down substantially. And there's utility taxes are probably the one that has the best chance for coming up. But again, take a look at the graphic that we gave in your packet, and the news isn't good. Our price, the unit prices for utilities are low right now. So the budget increases would not be wise in our estimation. Building permits, we're also budgeting those to be down. So we are looking at coming in at approximately just over $3 million, and that's where the 10-11 budget will be set. So that's $800,000, a little bit less, probably closer to the $600,000 below the 9-10 budget. And this one is a tough one. We knew it was going to be an issue. Interfund transfers are down $1.1 million. So what is this? This is the $500,000 that came from debt service, one time. $300,000 that came from economic development, one time, and $300,000, I'm going to draw a blank.
Downtown tip.
The downtown TIF, it's not really a decrease that was from a one-time, but with the TIF closing, we had a transfer to help support operations within the TIF, and that will go away. So that's kind of an offset to the $1.8 million increase in the property tax levy. So when we're looking at this, where did we have our budget set for 9-10, 89.7? Where's our preliminary projection with no revenue increases? 84.2. On the other side of the equation, when we first look at the budget, we're looking at business as usual. Well, we know that's not where we're going to end up, but just to paint a picture, if we proceed ahead, we would have wage increases at current staffing level, approximately 4%, or about a $2 million increase over current year. IMRF pension, this is the combination of the ERI cost and our market losses, and it's about a 3-to-1 ratio. The biggest portion of this is the ERI, that we're starting our payment of 10 years worth of payments for the early retirement incentive, and that's changing our rate from just over 8% of employee salaries to just under 12%. Police and fire pension, those increases are also going to go up for the actuarial report. On the positive side, we do have contracts up for 3 out of 4 union contracts, so at least we will be able to discuss these issues in bargaining sessions. Our smallest contract with the sergeants is not up.
Alderman Rainey has a question.
Marty, you know, when we were discussing the ERI, we were, it was argued that we would save millions of dollars by initiating that program. Is there any way where you can analyze and tell us what the truth really is, if we are saving money or if it is costing us?
I think we can. I think if
It's not urgent, but I just always wanted to know what's the real truth.
I think we can look at that. We're going to be looking at ways to potentially reduce that cost for the ERI payback. There are some options that we can look at. So while we do that.
Madam Mayor.
City Manager?
Yes, Madam Mayor, Alderman Rainey, one piece of our puzzle looking at next year's budget is our debt. In essence, what we have with this ERI is debt to the Illinois Municipal Retirement Fund. We think we can refinance that at a lower rate than we currently, in essence, borrowed the money from our IMRF. We are also looking at other debt, and we'll talk a little bit more about that in the capital section. So one solution of many solutions will be to refinance debt, so we're hoping that we'll be able to look at that as well.
Healthcare costs, the $800,000 increase, again, a very large majority of healthcare is in the general contributions, those are bargained, so we have kept those the same. We have, to the extent possible, changed some of the plan designs and reduced benefits where we could. It's already been a discussion of, or rather, an item of contention with our bargaining units that we shouldn't have even changed what we did change. So,
Alderman Bruce?
Yeah, I have a question about why 800,000 increased. Can you give some sort of general numbers? And the modest plan reductions, I was actually somewhat shocked to see how inexpensive the health insurance for the city is. I mean, really, it's amazing. It's such a great deal for employees. And I was just wondering, what's the increase for? And what is, when you talk about need to be, I guess, rebargained, or can you talk about that?
well, first off, the increase that our plan total is approximately $10.5 to $11 million, all told. With the medical inflation rate at 10%, a little bit higher for prescription drugs, if we were just going up at the medical inflation rate with no plan changes, then we would expect something of this nature. In our increase this year, though, with our change to going towards a self-funded format, part of our contributions this year is to establish a reserve for self-funding our plan, giving us flexibility. Now, I cannot in any way guarantee what that reserve will be at the end of 12 months or 19 months, which is the term that we will be in the health insurance co-op. But our goal is to get off of the fully insured roller coaster where any company gets to tell us what our rates will be. We'll have a lot better handle on what our claims are and what parts of our plan should be changed to try and mitigate claim costs, or to point out where we want more sharing by employees, retirees, or whomever, because those parts of the plan are being overutilized. Right now, we don't have that data, and we hope to move forward on that. Again, there's a concern for internal equity, so we could have done something for non-bargaining where, all right, the non-bargaining employee contributions is doubled. But we would have to wait for the bargaining units to go ahead and make that change. That's one that traditionally has been grieved and quite often won on the side of it. If you change the employee contribution level, that's quite a bit different than changing a deductible from $250 to $300.
Alderman Bruce?
And I know you say you don't have the data at this point, but I'm hoping, or should be assuming, that there will be a comparison to other municipalities and what their employees are paying compared to what our employees are paying. And is there also a comparison to the not-for-profit sector as well as the private sector looking at healthcare costs? Like I said, I mean, we are extremely, extremely fortunate on the low costs for employees that are paying. And so I'm wondering if there's a way to reduce that 800,000 in increase.
It goes to the universe of our comparison. We will be able to get the benchmarks for 50 communities that are in the co-op, and that's good news. Unfortunately, you won't like the benchmark because you'll find in some cases Community X just made a great step forward and finally had their employees pay anything towards their health care. And so the city currently has employees that pay 15 to 20% is the employee. Single employee pays a higher percentage than the family does. And so we're also going to be looking at that because we end up with, because we have it set up that way, we're the plan of choice for families. And our family coverage only costs 9-10% of total plan costs, but our single costs a little bit more, then there's no disincentive to have a family coverage. And we're not necessarily looking to do that, but we're at least going to make it an economic choice where a double income family can decide maybe they'll go to single plus children and not family, or maybe they'll have the single plan and go to the other employer's plan. You have to be careful about that from ethical perspectives. You can't just drive everyone on in hopes of them moving to other plans, because we do have single income families. But we are looking at all of those things. For those kinds of changes, I think that we do want to keep relations with our 3/4 of our employee groups, so we're going to need to talk about that at the table.
I just want another follow-up. Also, the model of the amount that employees pay in some health plans depends on their salary. So there's a different salary, 20,000 to 42,000 is a certain amount, 45,000 up to another amount. And I'm not sure if that's done in municipal government or not, but that's also a way to be more equitable about health insurance cost across the board, because you have an employee making $160,000 paying the same amount that an employee that's making $42,000 is paying. That's sort of a regressive way of looking at it.
And we can look at that. One of the issues that doesn't do is that doesn't address whether or not the employee at 160 or at 60, who's trying to hold their health care costs down. So you really want to look at the employee and say, well, if you'll be in our wellness program, or if you'll be in our HMO, this is where we're going to try and get you savings. So you try to control behavior and not just, it's basically behavior oriented or ability to pay. Which way do you go? When you're, so we should look at both of those. And there's more than two, but I would agree, we should look at all those. Again, one of the things to look at with liability costs, we have been successful in getting a lot of our outstanding claims down, but it has come at a cash price. And I look back in the history, at one point we had a bond issue that went through other funds to get to the insurance fund. We'd like to try to avoid that, and if we can start putting away a little extra now in all of the funds, then perhaps we can have that soft landing for the insurance fund where, yeah, we'll go low on our cash reserves with the idea of not hitting the bottom. And we've been very successful recently, and hope we can continue that staff has been in keeping those big claims out of there. And of course now, we also have a self-insured retention where the city in the past didn't have that. So that should limit our large claims. Again, the issue here, when we look at total costs, we're looking at almost a $5 million increase, but there are certainly ways that we can address that increase, especially on the personnel side. That is, again, business as usual, and we know that that's not really going to be the case for 10-11. We're going to have to make a lot of tough choices. It's not all about personnel, and we're going to get to the next when we take a quick break, but capital and then expenses, we will need to maintain our infrastructure. We've been very successful at getting grants and helping our own revenue sources. We also need to look at city facilities, and that's in our capital improvements plan that we'll get to. We talked about fleet, and we certainly have seen the benefits in the last couple of months of what technology can do for us, especially on the communication side. So we want to continue those efforts. We're just going to have to balance those with all of our personnel issues. The last bullet point here, the major heading, capital revenues and financing, as the manager pointed out, we're going to need to look at how we cover our capital costs in the future. Presently, we use some pay-as-you-go through water, sewer. Sewer actually had a lot of debt before, and we're paying it off now. But water and sewer, a lot of pay-as-you-go. But general fund and, I'm sorry, I said water and sewer, water and parking. But sewer and general fund, all debt financed if it's not via private donations or via debt financed or grants. Sorry, there it come back to me. Grants or other sources. So this is our calendar for the rest of the budget year. Very busy, lots of meetings, and we will have a lot of folks, different participants and stakeholders involved in these meetings. I don't need to read this to you, but certainly take any questions regarding it. And that's all we have for the second quarter.
Do you want to take a break, everyone, or do you? Yes? All right, we do apparently want to take a break. Yeah. Wally?
Yes.
Personnel. Here? Alderman Fisk, calling all aldermen. Mr. Lyons, I think we're ready anytime you are.
And Madam Mayor, members of the council, we apologize that there was one slide from the last presentation which was inadvertently skipped over. We want to go back because there's some important information on that slide regarding 1011 budget balancing personnel costs. Mr. Lyons, would you just maybe briefly go through that before we switch over to the capital presentation?
Certainly, thank you, Mr. Manager. We did discuss it briefly, but we didn't hit the bullet points specifically. So, in balancing the budget, the issues that are our biggest expenses are still our personnel, and just by way of review, you saw this slide, but you didn't see this one. We somehow went past it. So, if there's no increase in base or merit step raises, then that's approximately $2 million of our deficit. If we're able to finance the IMF, the ERI at lower interest rates, we could save $300,000. That's a very rough estimate. We have not done that analysis yet. If next year we're looking at reductions in services based on hours of operation, in this case furloughs, we're looking at if all of our staff, that is police, fire, every staff member, if they're off for that one day, it's approximately $200,000. And there's no real science to this. You approve a payroll every 2 weeks, and it's approximately $2.4 million. So, given 10 working days, and not counting for the fire 24-hour shift, but it is approximately $200,000 a day for all staff each day that the city is open. And when we're looking at this, it all depends on how we approach it. It could be lower staffing levels with similar hours, so we would be flexing, if you will, less people at each operational center, but we continue on with hours of operation, or looking at reduced hours of operation and actually trying to save on energy as well, and actually closing areas, whether that be a Wednesday closed at noon or a weekend date. This, of course, would only be for the non-24-hour operations. Then you have the changing of operations. Insourcing is a little bit different version of outsourcing, where we would, for insourcing, be looking to our neighbors to see if we can share services, where we'll be the coordinator of the services, and we're going to be able to take care of their services at the same fee we have our own, or at least work out a contract where we're going to provide services, whether or not that's for plan review or fire services. I think that we want to look at all of those. We do that presently with fire services in that we have mutual aid box alarm systems where we share. When our folks are busy, others come here. Then, of course, you have the staff reductions. That is
Marty?
also.
I'm sorry, Madam Mayor, members of the council, if I can just interrupt for a second. Let me talk a little bit more about the insourcing opportunity, because I don't believe that's something we have really talked about here at the council level. As we have begun working on the budget, we've looked to see what operations we could insource from neighboring communities, and we've been looking at the communities that are immediately adjacent to us, so the villages of Wilmette, Skokie, and Lincolnwood. And so we have made preliminary overtures to those three communities over the last month or so to see if anything may make sense. And so we are in preliminary discussions with those communities, and we'll keep you posted. But we see that there are probably opportunities with two of those three communities on some level, and we will keep you posted. But we see that as an opportunity to spread our overhead costs with some of those operations, and we think at this point it could be promising on a small scale with at least two of the three of our neighboring communities. So we'll keep you posted.
The next item, staff reductions. We've been now going, since I started with the city, we've been running with vacancies. And we have been doing, I think, a very good job in keeping services up. So this points toward whether those vacancies become permanent. So those are true staff reductions, and whether or not we go further. So that will also be considered as a means to getting to our total deficit reduction. Again, we talked about this earlier. Healthcare, that will be a negotiation, but those involve plan reductions or employee contributions. In some way, shape, or form, risk sharing on the benefit plan is what we need to look at. And we talked again, it is a dangerous situation with the fleet deferrals. It's whether we do it to save money in the general fund or we try to figure out another funding source for our fleet. It is one source to help balance our budget in the operating area. Alderman Rainey?
Yes. Marty, have we ever done an analysis of do we need all this fleet? And can somehow or another, would it be more economical to have city staff use their own car for certain things, you know, provide a
Last year,
benefit?
We did go through that with then Public Works Director, Mr. Burke. We went through that process and we eliminated, Lonnie, was it 10 or 11 or was it just 9? I know we eliminated 13 total vehicles through that process of looking at utilization and whether or not we needed those vehicles on a day in and day out basis. So that was 13 out of, still we have a lot of vehicles. To your point though, we are looking at other means, whether it be rental, whether it be the IRS utilization for mileage, whether it be a flat amount for services, or an employee stipend for using their car. That's definitely one of the things we need to look at, and that is reduction. We're also looking at whether or not the fleet services, if we did that, then would we have it open for the same level of hours? We run 2 shifts now. They overlap a little bit, but every little bit helps. So we won't just be looking at the general fund when it comes to the changes in operations.
Madam Mayor.
By the way, I will put that down as a report that we need to revisit and update, Alderman Rainey.
Did we ever see that?
It did come to the council. We had, it was in one of the committee rooms actually it was in AMPW when we were still in 2404 or 2402. We had that. So, any other questions?
No?
Thank you, Madam Mayor, members of the council. We're going to move on to the second presentation of the evening, and that's regarding the capital improvement program. I'd like to just share a few thoughts with you, though, before we make the presentation. This, as you know, is part of the council's 12 goals to evaluate how the council does its capital planning. This will be my first capital budget, operating budget as well, with the City of Evanston. So I've worked with the staff to try to understand how the City of Evanston has done its capital budgeting. And I will tell you, it doesn't make a lot of sense. And I'm sorry. My understanding is that it has been basically been driven not by ability to pay, but by perceived need. And the budget has been developed based on what staff perceived were the council's goals, rather than us going through a process with the council to identify those goals. And that was separate and apart from any ability to pay, since we were issuing debt to fund our general capital projects. My suggestion to the council is that we revisit that process, because I think it's important for the full council to set capital budget priorities, and then after those capital budget priorities are set, then us making an evaluation of our ability to pay, and then to come back with you with the financial consequences. So what you're going to hear from Mr. Lyons tonight is sort of an overview of how we have funded our capital projects in recent years, share with you what we think the current council priorities are. What has happened in past years at this mid-year budget report is that we have asked the council to basically sign off on the capital budget, and then we've gone to try to figure out how much debt to issue to pay for it. I'm suggesting we not do that this year, that instead we come back to you at a meeting in November and have a process somewhat similar to your goal-setting process to review capital projects once you understand our ability to pay. And then once we get a sense from you of your priorities, then we'll come back with financing solutions. But again, my understanding of the recent past is that that's not been the process, and I think that because of that, the council has lost some control as to what capital projects you move forward with, the timing of them. Staff has also taken approvals, in some cases many years in the past, held those projects for whatever reason, certainly not maliciously, but for funding or other things, and then all of a sudden they pop up. And in my time here, since August, there have been 2 or 3 occasions of projects that have come before the council where, if not all of you, certainly some of you have questioned, where did this come from? Why are we doing this? If there was a change in the project, why was that not previously discussed in more detail? And again, I'm not comfortable with that kind of process. So this evening, we're not asking for any action. Again, we previously have asked for approval of the coming year capital budget. We're not asking for that this evening. Instead, we're asking that you receive the report, kind of bring everybody up to speed on an overview of what we have done in the past, and then to come back to you in a few weeks. We're still looking at November meeting dates. We think we'll have at least one meeting where there'll be some time, or sufficient time to do this, but to have you then prioritize what you think is important based on what we believe our ability to pay is, and then move forward as part of the regular budget, have the capital budget be included in the proposed operating budget, and then have the council make its determinations on the capital side along with the operating side. So again, I think this is a process we can do much better, that we can serve the needs of all Evanston residents, again, within our financial means, to alter how this process is done, and that is my proposal. I'd be happy to answer any initial questions. Otherwise, Mr. Lyons will run through the presentation.
I do have a comment. You know, you suggesting going from perceived needs and apparently without financial consequences as the approach that we've been using.
Staff's perceived needs from the council.
Fine. I mean, so, and then you want to go to the council identifying the priorities in capital needs and couple that with the financial consequences of our choices. I mean, I think you need to include the perceived needs as well, because the needs come from staff study and analysis of what it is that the problems are, because we don't have kind of, you know, broad view of the entire city in terms of what's needed.
Absolutely.
So I assume that that factor would be.
And thank you for raising that point, Alderman John Baptiste. My concern is that there was a missing link, and that was a confirmation by the council that those perceived needs are the city council's perceived needs. We will continue to do that, and as part of Mr. Lyons' presentation this evening, you will have where we're at this point on that. I just am uncomfortable, based on my understanding of the process, that those perceived needs were never then confirmed by the council. If we missed something, or if the full council felt that there was a different need, my understanding of the previous process is there was not an opportunity for the city council to articulate that.
Well, we articulate those things during budget preparation times. The problem, and we, you know, we talk about the financial consequences. So I think you're talking about more vigilance as to what we give priority to, but I wouldn't take away the intervention of staff in trying to argue for certain priorities as well.
And Alderman John Baptiste, I'm not suggesting that would be the case.
All right, fine. Are we
But
good?
are you suggesting that we would now be able to argue some of our priorities?
Yes, Alderman Rainey, I am.
That would be great. That would be wonderful.
Yeah. I think it's got to, we have to make sure that we're not arbitrary in terms of, you know, even that.
And again,
You know,
members of the
the
council.
analysis of needs is very important to undergird what it is that's priority.
And members of the council, I agree with that completely. I just feel that there's been a missing step in my understanding of the process, that there's not been that final confirmation as to what the city council ultimately feels is that need. That's all. So we're basically asking to add that additional step.
Okay, let's cross that bridge.
I'd like to be sure the audience knows these microphones do not work very well, so if you can't hear in the back, you just have to move to the front. I'm sorry.
There's a question.
Judy.
I just had a comment. I really want to thank the city manager for this. I'm one of the ones who's been speaking about the capital budget for a while, and I think that's a real breath of fresh air, and I appreciate that very much. Thank you.
Thank you. All right, Marty, go right ahead.
Now, with what we're talking about, our change in moving forward, we did have to start with a baseline. So the information you received in your packet was similar to what you've received in the past. so that you did have at least all of the history of projects that are currently there. And what you will see in addressing the city manager's point is that any project that was previously approved and has not been completed at this point needs to come back before you. So those are all coming back around. If we have projects that, for whatever reason, we were waiting on a grant, whatever the reason, they have to come back through the process, not unlike any other budgeted item that we didn't get done in a given year. So each year we'll show those. So this is just a basic goal for the capital projects, and I don't need to read this to you, but it is to guide our long-term plan. So again, our capital, we do a 5-year plan. The first year has actually been adopted. In the past, it's been adopted. In the recent past, it's been adopted during the fall to give us an earlier start on bids because of the current economy, and we have favorable bid pricing anyway. We're suggesting that the capital improvements plan run with the budget on its approval process, that it will get the same level of scrutiny. So in January, February is when we're going to know what's going on with our capital budget as well as our operating budget.
Alderman Rainey?
I think mine kind of works. On page 2, can I ask you about page 2 of Steve's memo? Oh, no, it's from both of you. Yeah. There's a comment here that says, in 2009-10, that's this fiscal year, right? The city does not plan to issue any debt that will be paid from property taxes, which means that we'll save $625,000, which is a little more than $6 million in bonds, right? I mean, it's about
The 7.8 million that we had budgeted, we aren't going to issue any of it, so that's the savings.
That's where I get lost. I understand that you're not going to do this. I understand what the savings will be, but I don't understand if we've budgeted for projects. Are you saying that you've ordered a stop to them? Because why would we set in the budget the $625,000 for $6 million worth of projects that we're now not going to do, or we have money from something else to do them with?
Well, actually, I skipped a slide, and I can go back to the whole funding, but that was background. This is where we're at, and not because we skipped any projects or consciously said we're not going to do a project. Our budget for 9-10 was $32 million, and we're estimating that will come in at $18 million. Now, this can be for a variety of reasons. For instance, if we had budgeted the Wilmette Interconnect, now it's not going forward, so that project's moved out into the next year. We're into 11-12 as well. So some of our projects that we have all lined up for a variety of reasons don't go forward because of grants, because we're doing negotiations with another taxing body. But right now, in other cases also, they didn't get started on time. We went through our bid process, and we're starting a little bit late. So this is what we plan to spend before February 28, 2010. So right there, we're $14 million below where we're at. We're actually going to end the year with a higher reserve than anticipated in capital, water, sewer. All of those funds will have slightly more in reserves because these projects didn't move forward. And in the past, we may have had our schedule all laid out and issued debt so that we had it ready to go because we were going to do the projects.
All right, if that's the case, I think we should really know what those projects are.
Agreed.
And in the detail, what you have, and again, we can work on the size. I would recommend that we shoot you a different report that only shows last year, this year, and next year to blow our print up quite a bit. And we can show you the estimate compared to the budget project by project. It's a little bit difficult in that 4 or 5 page document to read those, but we have provided that in the report.
It's in here, project by project?
Yes.
Well, just tell me where it is. Oh, it's, okay,
So in the
okay.
legal size report, you see we have, we've added a couple of columns. One is an estimated actual for the current year. We also showed what did the departments ask for compared to what was the final CIP team recommendation. So there's a significant prioritization going on already. But that still results in a fairly large debt issue for this. So I'll give you a second to take a look at it before I go through.
You want us to discuss that in particular, or you want to come back to it at our next meeting?
No, no.
Because I think
Madam
we're
Mayor.
going
I
through a
just want to
priority.
make sure that I have it. I see that I have it.
Continue on.
And Mr. Lyons, just for the council's benefit, through the rest of this presentation, we're going to kind of talk area by area of projects. So what Alderman Rainey was asking is the detail of all of this. We're going to give a general overview over the next few minutes.
Just so you get an idea of the scope, we're looking at a total of over $200 million in capital. And so that's a large number, but the city has an assessed value of $3 billion. Now that's public and private, and actually that's all private, I should say. So there's a lot out there to be maintained. So when you're looking at that kind of a capital burden, if you will, that's really a set of minimums. Right there. So again, the previous slide was our expenses. At the beginning of 08-09, so that would have been March 08, we issued $8.8 million. Initial projections for the 09-10 budget, we were looking at about $12 million, and we cut that back because of budgetary concerns back to the $7.8 million, and then said we would issue that in the fall if we needed it. And we don't need it at this point, so that's why we're at the zero. But that also does take for the 10-11 and raise that up a little bit. We've deferred projects, but think of it this way. In the past, we would have probably done $10 to $11 million each year of property tax funded debt. So at this point, even if we have the $15 million, that will be over 2 years' time. So we will at least have saved $5 to $6 million in debt issuance by taking a look at this more strategically. The 11, 12, 12, 13, those include projects such as the Crown, replacement of a civic center. That's a planning list. So that's not necessarily saying it says GO. We would certainly take any ARRA funding or anything we could get from the federal level to augment our renovation or complete replacement of capital facilities. So again, this is, I think, important as we look at debt. Given our current interest rates, a basic rule of thumb for every $1 million we issue, it's $80,000 a year over 20 years for that debt.
Alderman Rainey?
You know, Mr. City Manager, I understand that the information I'm looking for is embedded right here in these sheets, but I would really like it snatched out and put on one sheet of paper, because to go across and find each one that I'm looking for, it's a lot of work.
And Alderman Rainey, members of the council, our request after this evening's meeting is to come back to you in a couple of weeks, and I think as Mr. Lyons has indicated, we'll reformat some of this for future discussion.
I just want a list, that's all. I don't want,
And we'll provide that.
because you got to subtract.
So the other part of this is, again, if we're only over a 10-year period, you can see the impact of discounting in interest rates. It's $130,000 a year, but only for 10 years. So for a 20-year bond, every $1 million costs us $1.6 million. For a 10-year bond, every $1 million costs us $1.3 million. We've really taken a lot of the compounding out of this, but just to give you an idea of our cost for borrowing. So what's our current debt status? Well, we had a budget of $7.8 million in debt, but we're not going to issue it. That's the $625,000 in principal and interest costs that are saved. Unfortunately, as we'll get down in a couple of bullet points, we're not going to get too much credit for that because of previous bond issues. outstanding general obligation debt principal of $174 million. Excuse me.
Is that why you're joking?
Thank you, Alden. And that's not just capital projects fund. There's water fund that we do use, general obligation debt. Some, I think most all of our sewer is the IEPA loans, but it's not just general obligation debt for streets, facilities. There's also some water that we used to call a double barrel bond, dual purpose bond. So for the GO debt payments, there's a total of a $22.4 million levy that would be required, but we abate more than half of that through those other sources. Some of that is TIF, some of that's water, but we do abate greater than half of that. For this coming year, that means we have a $10.1 million property tax levy estimated. That went up from about a 10.0 levy the year before. Even though we didn't issue any new debt, the previous 20-year schedules all overlapped, are causing us to go up $100,000 in our unabated debt service payment. While for the most part, all bond debt like this is level debt. You try not to end load or front load this debt. We have a little bit of debt creep, which is the last bullet point where we go from $10 million to about $10.6 million over the next 5 years. That's with no new debt. That's our debt service payments. So, technical difficulties.
Alderman Nguyen has a question.
Yes.
Well, Marty, I recognize the value of reducing this and deferring projects, except that to some degree, my understanding of where we are in terms of our capital needs and capital deficiencies, capital asset deficiencies, is because of deferred maintenance and deferred capital investment. The reason why our streets are in such terrible shape is because repeatedly, over years ago, they were never repaired. And so folded into this, in my mind, and I recognize the situation we're in now, but folded into this, in my mind, is that deferred maintenance is sometimes more expensive maintenance for the next, when you finally do make the repair. So is that coming into this analysis?
Actually, I think that would be if you were just looking at capital on its own. But I do think that we need to look at capital and operating. The two are much more closely linked because of the stress of the economy right now. So what's our right mix? We have a $90 million operating budget. Is that where we need to be? We're down to $84 million or $85 million. Is that the right level? So what's our operating level and what's our capital level? And all of those come together to create that tax burden. Because our revenues are our residents' expenses. So it's that mix that is what we have to be mindful of. Because whether it's capital vehicles or capital projects, if we let them go, it just costs more to fix later, right? I think the point is very well taken. So there is a concern there. We're just trying to, through this process, highlight where we're at right now.
Right. Well, I understand that. And before you came to Evanston, we went through a fairly detailed discussion. I believe Alderman Rainey and Alderman Jean-Baptiste remember this in terms of increasing our capital budget so that we could begin to improve the quality of the streets to some extent, and some of the other assets that we had that were in seriously poor shape. So there was a discussion in terms of increasing the capital budget slightly over the years so that we could begin to tackle some of the problems that we had. Now, obviously, times were better then, but that's just an observation that I have, is that so frequently deferred maintenance is, if you defer it too long, then you're really spending more money ultimately.
And I think, not to put too fine of a point on it, what I see as one thing to consider here is that our facilities and our what we might call one-time capital, the large ticket items, bonded.
Yeah.
That's a,
Okay.
but if we're going to spend $4.2 million every year on roadway maintenance, we shouldn't borrow for it. We should set up that revenue source for it, and take the interest out of the equation. With interest rates this low, don't get me wrong, interest rates are at an all-time low.
That's another
But
question I have.
that is something where we start to look at water, sewer, and streets, those ongoing capital needs, that's a maintenance program. And so we need to have a maintenance revenue source for them and take the interest out of the equation. That will lower our total borrowing and actually free us up to do a civic center or to do a Crown Center, because that's where we would have the bonding cap to work with. And we're not capped because we're home rule.
Well, it's what happened with the library.
Alderman Grover?
Mr. Lyons, have we issued debt for capital projects that haven't begun yet? Is there a disconnect between when we issue the debt and when the capital projects begin, and what happens to those funds in the meantime?
Yes, we have issued debt in the past. That's why we're able to, right now, use previously issued bond proceeds for our current capital projects. So we're eliminating that situation to get us down to what would be an appropriate beginning fund balance in the capital fund. Whether that's $3 million, $4 million, we should have some amount of revenue to start a year, then issue our bonds or determine our revenue sources and go with our capital projects. Get the money in right before those first payments show up from the contractors, and not have money sitting there where we're paying 4.5% on the
without-
bond and 1% earned on the interest.
Right. Alderman Burris, did you have a question? Alderman Rainey.
But we do have to have budgeted projects to go to the market to,
Definitely.
sell
When
bonds,
we
okay.
have an official statement.
so we have a plan, right?
Yes.
The next question I have is, we could never have this conversation over the last 10 years without a big discussion on the side of what's our bond rating going to be. And now with the rating agencies out of favor, is the bond rating still happening? I mean, is that,
The bond ratings are still out there.
they are?
You are
Haven't heard a
finding,
word
though,
about
that,
them.
A lot more of the borrowers are coming directly to us and saying, could I take 5 minutes of your time, Mr. Lyons, and go through your financial statement with you? They would like to know directly from us what's going on. Or they'll have their own banking establishments do a little bit of their own research. There is a concern right now with the ratings. When I look at our budget, should we still be AAA rated if we had a decrease in reserves? Should we still be there? And we're actually in very good shape compared to some other entities that were AA rated and have just taken a very huge hit. If they had an over-reliance on sales tax for their general operating, and they couldn't get a property tax levy increase put in place, their reserves go from 33% down to very low. What should happen with their bond ratings? And that's still something that's in the air, and I don't think we've seen the end of that whole discussion. I know when we go to market again, we'll have a very rigorous discussion with the ratings agents regarding our rating. I know that will be coming. So one of the things that where we were at that second bullet point, the capital improvements team met many times over the last, since we decided we would have a little bit more time to meet, we met a little bit more often. When you look at the capital improvements plan, we had a department requested. While department may not be the right term, it's really the group who's managing our streets or managing our water mains. So we had the original request, and that amount was decreased substantially down to the point where, with the capital plans recommended to move forward, we're at just over $15 million in new debt that would be needed to go through our entire year, complete the projects, and end with a reasonable fund balance to start the next year. So I just want to make sure that's the goal. And using our rule of thumb that we were talking about before, that would be approximately a $1.2 million increase to the tax levy. And if possible, we would look for any other revenue sources, but right now what we've identified is that's the amount that would need to be levied, and that would be on top of the $10,138,000 that you see in the third bullet point. So that would go to $11,000,003. So the next slide is just a breakdown of where we do get our funding sources by year over the last 3 years. And, again, you see that the estimate for GO debt is 0 this year. And you see at the bottom, that's capital fund reserves is synonymous with potentially previous grants that we've gotten, and we're now spending them for the project in question, or for the previous bond proceeds that we are now spending down. So the top dollar projects by department, this is just, the next few slides are listings, and I don't need to read through each of these, but we did break them out for the council as far as our public works projects concerning annual street resurfacing, traffic signal upgrades, salt dome, traffic operations maintenance. You get the idea. These are our top projects that we have by dollar amounts for the 10-11 years. We then go to the police department. The firing range is one that was deferred in order to complete the remodeling. And then we also have a large camera project at Foster and Dodge. The fire department, this may not be in the capital project, capital improvements fund. It's not usually there, but this is a once in 20-year occurrence. Both ladder trucks have reached their useful life. They're at 20 years. So in 1990, we bought ladder trucks. They're approximately $1.1 million. So as a part of the planning process, we're looking at replacing one ladder truck and refurbishing another ladder truck. So that would then stagger the two. You'd have one ladder truck approximately 7 years off, 8 years off of the replacement of the other. Now, will we be able to fund that this year? I don't know that that's a possibility. We would like to consider it. We know that both ladder trucks passed their most recent safety test, right, Chief? So they, but with the ladder truck, the day it doesn't pass the safety test is the day you're looking for the ladder, and the boom is the day you're looking for a new vehicle.
Alderman Burris?
Marty, could you go back to the last slide? Great. The firing range, I wanted to find out, so it'll be 210 to redo it.
Actually, that's phase one, so it'll be about 450
Okay.
total.
Do we know the cost of what it's currently costing us to have our officers drive elsewhere, pay to do their firing? I'm just looking at the cost-benefit analysis, because I know this isn't like it's something that if we don't do it, we're not incurring cost already. So we're incurring cost whether we do this here or we're sending them elsewhere. So that's my first question. I'm just looking at return on investment. And then the second one on the strong box camera at Foster and Dodge, the $98,000, how much time before we recoup that $98,000 in? Oh, no, this is, no, I'm sorry. I was thinking this was a ticket one. Never mind.
No, it's not a ticket.
Never mind. I'm like, there's a lot, I get tickets.
So, would you have a piggyback on the question?
Well, on that question, yes, because
Sorry.
Is that a replacement of the camera that's already there? I mean, there is a
Yes, that is just a replacement of the current camera. So, on the firing range, I believe we're at approximately $35,000 every 6 months is what we're looking at incurring in additional costs. So that's $70,000 a year, return on investment of about 7 to 8 years. Not to mention there may be other agencies that may want to coordinate with us in utilization of the range. There are downsides to it, to have that operation in your facility, but this is part of the prioritization process.
And if I may, Alderman Burris, we have an expenditure that we're getting ready to bring before the council in the next few weeks, and we've been putting together that very information because the next step would be the lead abatement of the existing range. And before we were to move forward with that, especially given our current budget situation, I've asked the police department basically for the same answers that you have.
Okay.
So before we would ask to move forward with that, we want to be sure that we think it makes sense to go down this road with the full project. And so you'll be seeing that before the council here in the next few weeks.
Okay, yeah, I just in all of these, my mind immediately goes to what is our, going back to something that Alderman Nguyen said is sort of like not return on investment in some ways, but also what's the cost if we don't do it? Because it's not like we cannot have that service in any way. So that's just where my questioning is coming from. Thank
Alderman Rainey?
Well, I know it's going to show that having our range operational is going to be more economical than the situation now. But what I want to know is, over the past 5 years, what have we spent on that firing range? Because as far as I can remember, we've been writing checks to have work done on that firing range for years. I thought it was done. I thought we were down there using it. And now this is for phase 1? I think we should have an accounting of, am I crazy or?
No, you're not crazy, but we didn't, I mean, they weren't doing work on it. Remember, it kept, because of whatever was happening there, they had to keep setting back and not starting on it. And that's why the people were being sent wherever to do the training that they needed to do.
But I think we were getting bills
Well,
for
actually, we
work.
did have design billing. I know that that's happened since I've been
But
here.
they
We
were
had work on design, so you would have seen those expenses come through in the last
Let's
few
get a
years.
report.
Asbestos.
And we will follow up with a report.
I've been down there, and I guarantee you there hasn't been work done on it. Alderman Grover?
Back to the previous slide about the ladder trucks, should I presume then that we did not get the grant to replace one of our aerial ladder trucks?
Actually, we did apply. I don't know where we're at, though.
All right, thank you.
Anyone else on the facilities? This is, of course, we've talked about, and this is 10-11. Of course, in 11-12, it goes up substantially if we're going to talk about Crown or the Civic Center major renovations, but we're at least trying to keep those ideas in mind. So the Civic Center renovation, we had favorable bids, so this has come down below the $2.7 million in the budget. So that includes some other renovations beyond just the roof. While doing the last renovation at the police facilities, we identified the need to replace parapet walls, and if we do not, it's not unlike the Civic Center situation. We're going to have leaks, we're going to have damage, we're going to have the same situation where, in this case, we'll have a remodeled area that does not have as long a life as it would if we're going to have damages. Library branch renovations is one that is still being considered. That is one branch. Animal shelter, that's a project that has been around, I believe, for a little while, and we're just coming forward with it. I don't need to read each of these, you get the idea. The Crown Center improvements, that's maintenance, that's not for design, that's just maintenance.
And that's a capital expense?
At the Crown Center, I'd say yes, because the amount, it's not just, do you have any details? It is in the project detail sheet.
Okay.
We can get with anyone afterwards to go through those in detail. Parks and Recreation, we have the Lakefront Master Plan, the next phase, Foster Field, Glad Arboretum, Brummel Park, James Park. And again, these are top ones. We do have others that are smaller capital plans. This is our, for I call it, for the most part, this is our technology capital section. So in the strategic plan, you have, we're looking at a $250,000 potential expenditure for the upgrade of City Works to cover public works. Right now, it's used by the water and sewer department, but not by public works. Excella is an annual payment. That is not, that project is substantially completed, so that is paying off, and also maintenance on the Excella software system. The network technology and server storage, those are the backbone of the city's infrastructure. So that's our web, our T1s, all of the information, all of the equipment we use to run both our internal networks and our connections between all of our facilities. So next, you just have a overall, as we noted before, by the type of expense. This is a summary of those previous pages, all on one page. And it includes any of the miscellaneous as well. So we do have a fairly aggressive, both of public works, that would be our street, our sidewalk, a lot of our maintenance programs, and our water sewer. And these are the areas that are also, per the Alderman this behind, if you will, so there is an effort to catch up with these, and we do use motor fuel tax, water, sewer, as much other revenue other than general obligation debt as we can. So next we have our projects funded by other sources. So this is just a summary. Lakefront Master Plan, a federal grant, alley paving. We're looking at using previous reserves because we have had the alley paving, the 50/50 program for a long time. We have built up reserves in that fund, so we're looking to do a 50/50 again where we have 50% private and 50% reserves. This will probably be the last year that we'll be able to do that, and we'll have to go back to, in this case, it would be $500,000 as part of a bond.
Wait. Explain that one more time.
The special assessment fund has enough reserves in it presently that we are looking at funding the whole 50/50 program, half from the residents' portion and half from our own reserves, rather than our portion would, actually, in years past, we've even bonded for the whole amount because we didn't have the residents' portion and we didn't have our own portion, so one was funded by residential payments, one was funded by property taxes, and that's how we paid for the 50/50 sidewalk program.
And Alex.
You can see we also have a very large contribution, and we're hopeful there's still some discussion, motor fuel tax. We may get a one-time increase in this total amount, so we will keep the council posted on this. Emerson and Lake Street funded by grants. The animal shelter funded by a donation. Water facility, this is, the water facility, excuse me, also has to do with, Dave, does this also have to do with the interconnect?
And the water main.
And the water main. So, thank you. The sewer lining, this is our ongoing program. And traffic signal upgrades, we picked those out and note them in the capital improvements plan, the specific interchanges to be taken care of by the upgrades. Again, the vehicles, road equipment, that is our fleet fund. We reduced the amount this year in recognition that we knew it was going to be a tight budget, and as we've talked, maybe that's not our best strategy. That's currently what we're looking at. So, what we're looking at in the past, right about now, we would have been approving this document, or at least at the next council meeting. We're proposing that this fold into the budget process, so that we have a coordinated review of both operating and capital for the 10-11 year. That's all I have. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Do you have questions? Marty, what would a 3% increase in the property tax garner?
Presently, our entire tax levy is approximately $38 million, so 3% would be approximately $1.2 million.
Thank you. And how much would that cost a family with a house of $400,000?
Our present rate is, if it's the assessed value, can I go to 100,000?
Yes, you can.
Thank you. With our current rate of 1.283, if we raise that by 3%, you're talking about for every $100,000 of assessed value, it's 1,283. Well, it's going to be another 3%, so $40.
Thank you. Do we have any other questions?
When is the reassessment for Evanston?
So I believe it's next year, tax year 2010.
Oh, good. Then we can really suffer.
The question was, when is the reassessment year?
Next year.
2010, which would be our 2011-12 budget.
I've been asked about taking questions from citizens. It's 9:20 at night. Do you all want to, it's not on the agenda.
Yeah, if it's relevant.
You wanna
what's being
take a-
presented, whatnot.
All right.
Good.
All right, do we have questions from the audience? Excellent.
Takes care of that.
Marty, you did a great job. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Lyons.
Could we have a motion to adjourn?
Move to adjourn.
All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed?